Hi, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here today. My guest today is Cameesha Gourley, and she's going to talk about her journey as an empath and intuitive, and she has a very powerful story. But first, I want to say hello to my listeners in Seattle, Washington. I really appreciate your support of the show. I see you here week after week, and it's not going unnoticed. I want you to know that. So let me tell you a little bit more. I've known Cameesha for years, love her dearly. And it was knowing her story that, I asked her to be on the show. So not only is she an empath, but she's an intuitive life coach. And Cameesha uses her specialties, her spiritual gifts, and her life experience to help clients navigate life challenges. So, I think what's really interesting for a lot of people, they've asked me questions and I'm always giving my experience, but all I can give is my experience. And that's why I like to have guests on like you, Cameesha, because I think it's interesting to hear other people's stories. So let's talk about, how did you first realize that you had the spiritual gift of being an empath?
Well, you know what? Growing up, I always thought I was just overly sensitive, but it wasn't until a very faithful event at my mother's house when my now husband, but then boyfriend, came with the family for our Christmas get together. And we were exchanging gifts, which was only to our nephew, who was the only child in the family. We were all adults and we were like, you know what? We don't need to exchange gifts amongst us. Let's just give gifts to our nephew. So I have to go back and describe my now husband and boyfriend. If you could picture a caveman, that's my husband. He's very traditional, prefers for the woman to be at home, but had no problem with me having my own and, working and things like that. But he's a very traditional man. So when he saw my nephew being gifted a purple Easy Bake Oven, I had all of these thoughts flood my consciousness. I was saying to myself, oh my God, that is so stupid. How could they? Oh, and oh my God. And my heart was pounding out of control. And I just knew that that wasn't me saying that. And I looked over to him and I just saw this look of terror on his face, and his knee was going up and down. And I calmly pressed his knee to calm him down. And then I was like, oh, okay, that was my light bulb moment, that I've been intuiting others people's energy and taking on their thoughts all this time. And then from then on, I was like, oh, I have to learn more about this.
I love that story because I know you well enough to know that wouldn't be your reaction. But
Not at all.
there's everybody's got to have that light bulb moment. Something you say really resonates for me, Cameesha, and that's about always thinking you're very sensitive. All my life since early childhood, people are like, "You're so sensitive. You're overly sensitive." Da da da. And now when people say that, I say, "You're right. It's called being an empath, and it's one of my spiritual gifts. And I do shield myself as best I can, but I'm still always an empath. So it's very empowering to go from feeling like you're too sensitive to, this is a spiritual gift."
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, it was really just through, researching, thank God for the internet, just researching more about empath, reading books. Judith Orloff visit, the Empath Survival Guide was a nice, laid great fundamental groundwork for her experiences as well as ways to navigating it. And then that led me on to, wonderful teachers like yourself that not only helped me with the empath gift, but to build the intuitive gifts as well. So, from then on, I just really had to open in it. Also, me opening that door allowed my family to kind of open their doors and be like, yeah, I've always been intuitive too, and I had sensitivity, but being a millennial and having generation, baby boomer parents, they weren't afforded the freedom that I have to really express themselves this way. They kind of had to close themselves off. So me discovering this gift kind of allowed that to usher their intuitive abilities even more so. So, they say it's like a blessing, but it's also a curse. But it's not only helped me, but up above the family tree as well.
I'm laughing because it's reminding me of my mother. And not only my mother, but I'll tell you this, like when I left my job as director of mental health to do this work, my parents were horrified and
Yeah.
thought I had ruined my life. What are you doing? You're at the pinnacle of your career.
Yes.
You know, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And then it was like 2 years later, my father says, well, we always thought that our mother was psychic because this, that, and the other. And then my mom comes up with, I'm pretty sure I'm psychic. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I know exactly what you're saying. Like it opens a door for you, that epiphany moment
That's
opens a door for you, but it helps definitely open some windows, at least for other people to start waking up as well. It's that domino effect.
Oh, yes, yes. Especially, I was very thankful that my husband was just on board with it too, because he just started witnessing so many different anomalies, if you want to call them. He was being visited by, spirits as well. And we had several let's say ultra terrestrial visitors too. So because of that, he was like, you know what, you go do your thing. I'm all for you quitting your job. And he was down for me quitting my job anyway, because he was like, oh, you're going to be home with the kids. That's even plus. And yes, you can have your at-home intuitive business. Go for it. So yeah, it's been really a cool journey.
I've
in that.
always said that nothing opens a person's mind to the supernatural, to paranormal, to all of this more than having their own experience.
Absolutely.
So I love
Absolutely.
that your husband has had those experiences as well.
Yes, yes, and supportive, which is key because as you are aware, there's not much support. And I didn't come across a lot of support either. I'm mentioning the positive, but I went to a very I went to a Catholic college. It was like the Catholic college to go to. And people were none too pleased with my decision to become an intuitive, um, as opposed to a finance manager. At a luxury goods firm. So
Oh, yeah.
I had a lot of people distance themselves from me because I decided to go in that round. But on the other end, I had other people come in. So, although it's like sad to see a chapter end, there's also a beautiful chapter that opened up as well.
Absolutely. Like you're walking a path with these friends and then your paths diverge. They're not
Yes.
meant to walk on that path. It's okay. That's,
Yes.
it's not awful when friends fall away.
No.
That you're right. I'm so glad that you've had that happen too, where you get these wonderful new spiritual friends who are like part of your spiritual tribe, who you can talk openly to, who get it, or at least are open-minded to hearing about your experiences.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, it's like it's a very polarizing career choice because either people are drawn to you like a moth to a flame, or they want absolutely nothing to do with you. It's like, oh, okay, that's weird, girl, but do your thing. Um,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was at the last birthday party for a dear friend in Northern Arizona, and it was always a big musical event because all of us are either singers or musicians. And a friend was there that I used to sing in a group with and knew her since
oh
I was 18 years old. So I've
gosh.
known her for ages, sang with her in shows for the years. And we were so excited to see each other. And she asked where I was, what I was doing. When I told her, she recoiled in horror and has
Mm,
not spoken a word to me since.
wow.
So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, yes. So that's right. There's going to be people who just are totally closed minded and they're not ready. And I'm not going to
No,
hold it against them, but it's just a
exactly.
reminder that, like you say, there's going to be people who just shut down to that.
Absolutely, yeah. And that has, not to even, downplay it because that has been a very hurtful process
Mhm.
for me, delving into this part. Um, I have three young kids, and I remember when I decided to transition from a corporate job to being a work at home mom, I was very much looking forward to being with a certain community of people. And when I was ready, when I transitioned and I was like, okay, hey, I'm home, I can hang out with these other stay at home moms. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with me because I think I let the cat out of the bag. Like, oh, yeah, I quit that job, but I'm also doing this job. Doors were closed.
But you can't change your path. It doesn't change the path that's been
Yes,
presented to you and that you know in your soul.
Yes.
you're supposed to walk. So yeah, there's some painful moments like that. It's one of the things I caution people, particularly if they want to be a medium,
Yes.
to be prepared for that. But even being a psychic, there's people who have real issues with that, misunderstandings
Yes.
really about what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. But again, just the community that I do have now is wonderful. And I came witness to so many beautiful things, especially I don't know if I want to skip ahead to this part, but especially when I was in Hope for Cancer for my cancer treatment, there that was just a very beautiful mystical experience. And again, it was a bit polarizing because it was very religious there. It's very spiritual, but more on the religious side, which is fine. I have no problem. But I was kind of keeping my background to myself. But I partnered with one woman. We just had an amazing time together, and she was having some kind of physical issues. So I was like, look, I'm an energy healer, I'm an intuitive, can I give you an energy healing? And she was like, sure, yeah. So I gave her a healing. And then I was like, all right, just rest. And, I can't promise you anything, but hey, you know. So later on, I go to eat and she tells everyone, oh my God, Cameesha's an energy healer and an intuitive. And she, like, I no longer have this pain. And I thought I was going to have to go to hospital abroad. And she's wonderful. And just how
And on
you
the
mentioned,
inside, you're like, oh no.
yes. I was like, no,
I'm
please.
trying to keep a low profile here.
Yeah. So I instantly got ostracized by almost everyone there.
Oh, she didn't know though. She
She
didn't
didn't know. She
know.
had the purest heart. And me and her had maintained a wonderful, close relationship up until her passing, unfortunately.
Oh,
So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, yes.
So
So,
let's talk about that. I know that I guess maybe we should go back because I don't want to forget this. Like how did you realize you were intuitive? Because that can be a
well,
different awakening.
yeah, so it all started, birth and death just have a way of opening doorways. So I think just one, being a mom, you're a portal for the physical realm and the spiritual realm. Like you're bringing in another being. So I instantly knew what my child was going to look like. I just had this sixth sense of things. But the biggest way that I knew I was intuitive was when my brother passed away. And I went to one of my first mentors. I wanted to do a reading just to make sure that he was okay as he transitioned or after his transition. And before the reading, I kept on seeing him in my mind's eye, just doing like this crazy things with his eyes that he used to do with me as a kid. And I'm like, wow, why am I thinking of this all day? Like, this is so silly. So I finally have my session with her. She was like, oh my God, he's popping out his eyes at me. And then it was that other light bulb moment like, oh, no way. That's me actually seeing spirit. So then on, I was like, okay, well, I have to learn about this as well. So it was even more reading and partnering with different mentors. And, eventually, led me to you, which was awesome. So, I had to deep dive. And it was like, oh, I wasn't imagining this as a kid. I was more than likely playing with some spirits that, were in our area. Or, no wonder I was good at a spelling bee because I could just see the words, or I would just magically know things or been like I wasn't at locations before, but I knew how to get there as a child. And I remember one time I was in Georgia, I live in New Jersey, and I was visiting with relatives, and they were going somewhere that they've never been before. I'm not from the area, so I had no idea how to get there. So we're driving along this road, and they're like looking for a place. And this is before GPS, this is in the 90s. And I just said, just make a turn right here. And they're like, yeah, this is the spot. And they're like, how did she know that? And I was just like, I don't know, just,
That
this
sense
is
of
it.
knowing without having a way to know is such a powerful sign of intuitive ability for sure.
Yeah. So it was just connecting the dots and all the little things. It's like, oh, that's what that is. But I wanted to do it in an intelligent way that married, who I am. I can't ignore the fact that, I've had all these experiences, prior to my awakening. But I also know that I couldn't continue in that vein anymore. And I wanted to proceed in a way where I can not only help others, but, help others with their questions, but help them too to see and master their intuitive abilities. So, yeah, that's how that all came
It's
together.
so interesting. There's things like some of the gifts I have. When I woke up to the realization I had them, I had never thought about doing that as a profession. Never thought about doing sessions with that. And then once I realized, like I knew, oh, I'm supposed to do this now. Now, and my angels told me, you're woken up to these things when it's time for you to start doing something about it.
Yeah.
And then before then, you're not meant to see it.
Yeah, it just makes total sense, especially when you put it like that. And, I just became just such a student. And you know what's so funny? I always, as a child, I just love, hidden knowledge, the occult, all that stuff. But I was too embarrassed to say, I want to be an intuitive or a psychic or an astrologer or anything in that vein. Whenever we would drive around and we would see the businesses, I'll be like, oh man, I want to go inside and I want to get a reading. But because, the way that our society is structured, I didn't know if it was appropriate to make those wishes. So, yeah. But now we live in a wonderful time where there's just so much more openness to these fields that, this was the safest point for me to open up to those experiences.
For most of my adult life, I think there were three people I ever told about my spiritual gifts, and one was my
Wow.
daughter. And so that's how
Wow.
closed I was, very, very careful because I had some bad reactions early on and
Yes.
about even the theme without even saying that I had the gifts. So I learned early on that most of the people in my life are ultra conservative and
Yes.
I needed to be very careful. So it is a changing world. Things are opening and more people are accepting, are interested, they're curious. It does make it a lot more comfortable to say, hey, I'm an empath, I'm an intuitive, I'm here, no matter what your background is.
Absolutely. And honestly, I give, you and everyone in your generation before so much credit because, excuse my French, you guys have balls of steel to be able to just have a career like that. I mean, it's just so bold. Like I don't I always say I was born at the right time because I don't think I would have been physically or mentally strong enough to handle the transition.
Even people in my generation, a lot of them didn't start till later, or like me. I'm not going to say I'm such a brave person in that regard. In other regards, sure. But in this regard, I was working my mental health career and doing readings and healings on the side and not letting those two mix at all.
Yes.
Because I saw people lose their careers for a lot less than that in mental health
Yes. Yes.
and get locked up.
Yes.
I worked at a psychiatric hospital in the beginning. It's like, no, I don't want to be in that padded room. Thank you very much. So, what you said you had some intuitive signs before your cancer diagnosis. Do you mind
Yes.
talking about that?
Well, very interesting. So in 2016, I decided to change my hair and I locked it. And then after I got locks in my hair, I had a dream that I was brushing my hair and the locks changed from locks to regular hair. So it went from my locks to how it was beforehand. And I was like, oh man, I don't want my hair to come out. I just spent all this money on, getting this done. And it just took 2 days to install. So I had that dream once. I was like, okay. And then in 2019, I had moved in with my in-laws. And aside from the intuitive nudges, they were physical signs. I got a cyst on my breasts. And that growing up, I had cysts underneath my arms before, non-cancerous. It was tested. So I just thought, okay, it's on my breast for some reason. It must be because I'm so stressed living with my in-laws, for almost, 7, 8 months. So I was like, I'll check it out, when we move back in. So we moved back in And I'm like, "Ugh, I'm not going to get this tested. It'll just go away." So I have a dream. And the dream, I was in a Dr. Pimple Popper show. And it wasn't that doctor from the show, but it was probably, an angel, guardian angel, a man came before me and was like, "Ma'am, this is not a cyst." And I woke up and I was like, okay. And then finally, oh, beforehand, before we moved in, I was reading a book about intuitive development, and it was about a woman with breast cancer who developed her intuitive skills. So it was just like all these things that I was reading, and I was getting signals to like detox because I honestly think my diagnosis was worse before I actually got scanned because I was doing all like these crazy detoxes too to just kind of cleanse my system. Um, and then I finally had like a second, third dream of like my hair turning. And then I got tested and they're like, "Okay, you're stage one." Had my first surgery and they're like, we think one of those indecipherable areas is actually a cancerous area. Turned out to be cancerous. So we're from stage one to stage three. And then the world went haywire because this is January 2020 and everything got turned up loose. Um, I had this horrible wound open up where they did the surgery. So it delayed it for 2, 3 months. And by the time my surgery was ready or I was able to do chemo, that was when COVID started. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to continue with doing all this hardcore with something that I need a strong immune system for. Um, and also, too, I was getting these things about, adjunctive therapies beforehand. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do anything adjunctive. I'm just going to do chemo and radiation. Um, but I still looked at it and I was like, okay, this is interesting information. But it turns out like that was like a signal to be like, no, you need to look into this as well as doing, whatever, your doctors prescribe. So, all those things like in hindsight, it seemed like bad luck. It seemed like, um, a coincidence, but it was just really, these intuitive nudges that my angels were giving me to, watch out for me. Um, so uh, I had the surgeries, and then I was working with different doctors to support my immune system, but my stress level was out of control. There were several things happening at one time that I just was not ready for. My husband lost his job, so we went from having good insurance to not having good insurance. I went from having so much help for my cancer support to having nothing at all because everyone was home taking care of their children and I had no support. And I was home with my kids who needed to be homeschooled and who were going crazy because, it was COVID and my husband, I think I mentioned he lost his job and, there was all the civil unrest and I'm in an interracial relationship. I have biracial kids and I live in an area that, let's just say I got the finger pretty often just from walking around because people were just so enraged or just filled in with this energy of just separation. Just the sight of me would make people upset, where they would just curse me out and give me the finger. So I was, and plus two, I'm empathic, I'm sensitive. So I wasn't taking this very well.
I remember this time and I was so worried about you. And
Yeah.
I didn't even know that you were having all of that, the racial, hostility aimed at you. But I remember that so
Yeah.
worried. That was such a terrible time for you.
Yeah. And like you don't want to burden anyone with it because I'm such a strong, independent person. And to be in this point, I was living my living, actual, waking nightmare. That's what 2020, but especially from 2019 to 2023, it was an intense, but especially 2020, an incredibly tense and hostile time. So all I say all that to say that wasn't good with someone who's battling cancer. So it's no shock that it went from here to there to the bones and God knows where else. And um, on top of that, I was in a car accident. No fault to my own.
Right.
No fault to my own. I had my daughter in my car. We were coming home from the chiropractor, of all places. Coming home from the chiropractor's office. And it was what was so funny about that night was that I left later on in the evening because I was like, I don't want to go in the morning or in the between the 5 p.m. and 6:30 hour because that's rush hour traffic. I want to go at 7 where there's not a lot of traffic out. And guess what? Some car was going so fast, it went airborne, went out of control, and clipped me. And me and my daughter went 360 on a highway. Totally scary. We were trapped in our car. So between that and I think at that time it was the Omicron variant, it was not a good time. I was doing so bad. I was in and out of the hospital several times. My husband, he couldn't take looking at me. He just kind of, it's terrible to say, but his way of falling apart was to just focus on what he could focus on. He was just focused on the kids. Like my friends had to come and help me because he couldn't take looking at me. I couldn't talk. I couldn't walk. I had tubes in my lungs to help drain the fluid. And my closest girlfriends were like, you need to prepare a will because, you're not, it doesn't look like you're going to make it. And I was in so much pain that I was just asking to be taken away. I was like, I can't continue to live. I need to like, you know, I don't like voicing it, but I have to say my truth. I wanted to go. I wanted to transition because it was just such a painful experience. But one of my friends, I had a lot of prayer warriors with me. And one of my girlfriends, she sent me this picture, and it was like this frozen tree. And she was like, this tree reminds me of you. And she goes, it's the winter time, it's under ice, and it may look like it's, she didn't say dead, but she was like, it may look like it's not in full bloom, but it's just resting. And she was like, I just feel like this for you is like your half, it's like your middle point. And after this, you're gonna come out of this and be in full bloom and and prosper. And she doesn't know it, but that text just created a mental switch and saved me. And the only thing I could do was sit in the corner of my couch and watch TV. So I was like, if I'm going to watch TV, I'm going to watch something that makes me smile. So I just watched the entire season of Seinfeld and all this funny, entertaining things. And I just laughed, and that really kept me through. And I also got introduced to different healing modalities that really put into perspective the emotional side of what it means to have a breast cancer. I learned it's a conflict of the nest. I was like, oh yeah, I was actively cancering during my renovation. That's when it all started. And then I just kind of deep dived into that. And now I'm learning, I'm becoming a facilitator in that realm so I can help people who are not only dealing with cancer, but diabetes, who are looking to eliminate weight, whatever conflicts people are working with. I've delved into being a life coach to help them. So um, after I finally found a good doctor to work with, he told me my prognosis. He's like, look, Cameesha, you are terminal. You have stage 4 terminal. I can give you 10 years, if you take these medications. And I just said to myself, okay, I smoke all that in, but I'm like, I'm really going to give this my best shot. So I waited till my lungs were healthy enough. I flew to Hope for Cancer in Mexico, and I got a lot better after that. And then I came home and was healing more. And then during that time, I got a nanny, and that's actually a very funny story. My friends actually had put out a thing for me to get a nanny. So I had two nannies that I was going to use, and then one by one, none of them worked out. And then last minute, I asked this young lady who, messaged me earlier, and I told her, I'm sorry, I already have two people that I'm going to test out. So in case those people don't work out, I will reach out, but just to let you know, like, I don't, I'm not sure if I'll reach out. But I reached back out to her. I said, hey, can you come through? And she was like, yeah. She comes in, and I see a woman around her. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like talking to, the spirit I see. And I'm like, And the young girl's talking, and she was like, "Yeah, my mother died." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I was talking to the mother. I was like, "Did you make those other two ladies not show up so your daughter could come here?" And she's like, "Yep, I
They
did."
weren't as good for you as my daughter.
Yes. And her name is Angelica, and she has
Oh my
literally been my
gosh.
angel. She's been with our family for 2 years now. And she's such an important part of our family. Like she's even been, her mother asked me to be her godmother. So I'm now like her godmother, which
That
is just,
had to be a turning point for you because I remember talking to you and you were just beyond your wits' end. Like, I got so much stress on me and it was hitting you from so many sides, and you had little children to take care of.
yeah. Yeah, and speaking with parents now, we're just saying how difficult it is to be a parent. Like we can't compare it to before the millennium and even 10, 20 years ago. It takes such a group community effort to raise children. And I didn't have the tools at that time to, take on my kids, manage cancer care, teach them, cook for them. Like it was a lot.
I'm so glad that you found a wonderful nanny. I just, that your energy now versus even a year ago is vastly improved. So
Yes.
I'm just so happy to see that. I don't want to run out of time to talk about your podcast because I didn't know you were doing two. So would you talk about those a little bit?
So I have my strictly intuitive site. It's called the Intuitive Empath Podcast, and we talk about everything about being an intuitive, ways to navigate being intuitive, how to improve your intuitive abilities, and and everything else that can come up. And now I also have the How to Bounce Back podcast, which is my life coaching business. And I talk about my story. I give wellness tips. And I also am a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach. And I'm a certified cancer exercise specialist. So I have all that combined so I can work with your mind, body, and soul, honey. Whatever you have, I can help you to navigate a plan for. So I'm just giving different types of advice, whether it's cancer related or any other type of major stressors that can knock you off your feet. I have the two kind of to counterbalance each other and
Well, I'm
give
so
people.
excited that you're moving ahead because those of you who don't know Cameesha, she was poised to really start her business, and then her cancer hit and COVID and all of this stuff. So it's really been something that put a major challenge in your way, but you moving past that and forging ahead. And as it always is, our biggest challenges in life when you have spiritual gifts end up being what you're going to help people with.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that was the other thing that kept me through. I was like, my mentor, she had an intense dark night of the soul, but that brought her to her niche. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm being attacked by the body. So I was like, oh, okay, I used to do before children, I used to do the bodybuilding fitness competitions, triathlons, all that stuff. So am I doing triathlons and all that stuff now? No, but I am working out differently to my ability because, I've had a lot of, physical issues, but that doesn't mean that I'm down and out. And that's my encouragement to other people that you can find a way to bounce back in your own way that works for you so you can live your best life.
I think nobody can help you with a situation like a person who's been through it. So I encourage those of you out there who are empaths, who, especially if you're going through cancer, or, especially you're in the midst of that right now and you need some support and guidance with that in your own spiritual journey, Cameesha is an excellent person to go to. I'm not going to ask you to give your emails because people generally can't remember them. What I'm going to do is put the email and the name of her podcast in the show description so you can read it there and get the correct spelling and find her easier if you'd like to work with her as a client or find out more about Cameesha. Cameesha, thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show.
you.
I have been waiting for this for a long time. It's been just a joy.
Thank you, Ivory, for having me.
Tune in next week. The topic is I wrote it over here. Female archetypes. So we're going to be talking about that. That's kind of a big thing happening right now, especially if you're my age group, which is considered a crone. And that sounds like a horrible thing, but it's not. It's like the wise woman. So we're going to talk about all those different archetypes that women have. And there's actually a new one being proposed because people are living longer. So they're thinking there needs to be something between a couple of those, maybe something before a crone. So we'll talk about that as well. In the meantime, may your angels surround you. May your angels protect you every moment, every day of your life. I'll see you next week.